I mean, it was raining last night. I mean, it's not as dry as a bone.
Oh my, it's fabulous. Wow.
I mean, it isn't specific to Bermuda. They do it in other countries. And
Yeah.
They did in quite a few other countries. But something like this, an organized roof, as you see it here, for a specific purpose like this, built for domestic reasons, you probably wouldn't have seen something like this built like this and for this reason. Definitely within the last 200 years here, because there would have been no real reason for it. I mean, mind you, you can have these little sort of tiki roofs outside around the pool, but that's different. That's not, that's not this.
How long did this take to build, and how many people worked on it?
Well, myself and David, who's here outside, we're here part-time, and we started in March, actually, and we've had 1 or 2 volunteer days, you know, just folks who come on a Saturday and help us to do whatever we may need. It normally goes from 10 to about 4. But essentially, all of it's been done by myself and David outside.
And where did you learn the skills to do this?
Where did I learn the skills to do this?
This is not...
It's not your everyday thing.
No.
No, it really isn't. And I'll be honest with you. I started on this kind of journey in my early 20s. And it was a combination of basic curiosity and being exposed to the reclaim and Lombard of old buildings. I sort of started at the back end, as opposed to the actual building, learning on a building site. We used to scavenge a lot of old material out of buildings. So I had a keen interest in the components that went into a lot of old buildings. But you would say, well, you wouldn't have the opportunity to pull this kind of thing apart. Bermuda's vernacular architecture really hasn't evolved that much. In actual fact, there are still some buildings standing that would have this timber frame structure that has been infilled with stone, built up, and then plastered on the outside. Now, if you look at this structure and Carter House, you would see there would be only 1 or 2 steps in the evolvement over the last 300 or 400 years. The roof structures universal. I mean, almost any house you would go through around the world would have that has a wooden roof. Right. The structure is basically the same. And then we have these what we call laths, but you would probably call them purlins, that run along the roof. And as the roof evolved, these got closer as they went to shingles, something like this. Now, I'm not sure what you might use at home, where you're from, for the roof. I mean, today, you know, there's all kinds of synthetic asphalt shingles. Okay, but the idea is basically the same. Yes. You see, the very first structures in the very early 17th century would have had a thatched roof, but they would have found it unsuitable pretty quickly. In fact, I just said, so I was up in Dockyard the other day, and I read something up in Dockyard that said, I think it was 1639, somewhere in the 1630s, where someone came to the island and noticed that there were sort of 5 ramshackle houses. So we're talking about 20 years after the first settlers came. So it didn't evolve over 2 weeks, but it did evolve very quickly as far as time goes. And they would have found that these thatched roofs, they just weren't suitable for fire reasons and also hurricanes. Bermuda, we do get hurricanes here, and whether or not they would, and I must say, the very first houses they would have built would have looked almost similar to this, but they would not have been as sturdy. They would have been quickly put up and just used for utilitarian purposes. They weren't thinking of 100 years like we might think today. They just wanted shelter. Right. And they didn't build them as stout as this one's built, but the method is exactly the same. And the reason why we know this is because there have been post hills found in Jamestown that are almost exactly like this, which is where our plan came from. And because the settlers came from the same areas, their methods would have been the same. So then, by accounts and by that fact, you can almost figure that the house would be the same. So once they decided that these palmetto roofs weren't strong enough, there was an English way of building where they used shingles. And you use shingles in the U.S. It's a universal application. Now it's easy to make these shingles. You see, this is just a piece of wood that's been cut off, obviously. And I have a tool outside, it's called a froe. I think it's in there. I'll get it. But what I do is I just put this froe here, and I can just bang it down with my tool, my homemade tool that I've got, which is in the, actually, let me just see if it's in the, just let me see if it's in